I'm not much for going around telling what happens to me on the road, but this thing I lived through, buddy, I can't get it out of my head. And believe me, I've seen strange things in my 28 years behind the wheel, but nothing like this. At first, I thought it was just a simple good deed like so many others. But what came after was something else, something that even today is hard for me to believe, and that's why I tell it. My name is Ray Kowalski, I'm 52 years old, and I've been rolling on these highways since I was barely out of high school. My home is an old Peterbilt 379 named Dolly, worn but reliable, with which I've crossed this continent more times than I care to count. That night I was coming down from Chicago heading toward Los Angeles, hauling a load of electronics through the Nevada desert on Highway 50. Everything was calm, too calm, I'd say. The kind of quiet that makes you turn up the radio just to hear something besides the hum of your engine and the whisper of wind through the cab. It was past midnight when I saw her, standing alone at the edge of the road near mile marker 247, right before a curve with nothing but sagebrush and darkness stretching in every direction. The first thing I thought was that's not normal. Nobody stands out here at this hour unless something's gone real wrong. I've driven past plenty of broken down cars in my time, usually just keep rolling and let the highway patrol handle it. But something about the way she stood there, small and still against all that emptiness, made me ease off the throttle. I pulled Dolly onto the shoulder about 50 yards past where she was standing, air brakes hissing as I brought 18 wheels to a stop. Through my side mirror, I could see her hurrying toward the cab, and when she stepped into the glow of my running lights, I got my first good look at her. She was maybe 30, 35, with dark hair pulled back and clothes that looked like she'd been traveling hard. Her car, a beat-up Honda Civic, sat dark and silent behind her with the hood up. She knocked on my passenger door, and when I rolled down the window, the first words out of her mouth were "Thank you for stopping." Her voice had an accent, maybe Mexican, and there was something in it that made me think she'd been close to crying not too long before. I asked her what the trouble was, and she said her car had just died on her, no warning, no nothing. Said she was trying to get to Reno for a job interview in the morning. Now I've got a rule about hitchhikers, has served me well for nearly 3 decades on the road. You don't pick them up, period. Too many ways for things to go sideways. Too many stories of drivers who thought they were being good Samaritans and ended up robbed or worse. But looking down at this woman, seeing how she kept glancing back down the dark highway like she expected something bad to come rolling out of the night, I found myself asking if she needed a ride to the next town. Her face lit up when I said it, relief washing over her features like I'd just thrown her a lifeline. She said yes, please, anything to get her moving again. I told her to grab whatever she needed from her car, that I could drop her at the truck stop in Fernley where she could call for help or catch a bus. She disappeared back into the darkness for a minute, and when she came back, all she had was a small backpack slung over her shoulder. She climbed up into the cab, and I got my first close look at her. Pretty woman, tired eyes, hands that shook just a little when she buckled her seatbelt. She said her name was Maria Santos, thanked me again for stopping, said most people wouldn't have bothered. I told her my name, asked what kind of work she was looking for in Reno. She said housekeeping at one of the casinos, that she had experience and they were hiring. We got rolling again, Dolly's engine settling into its familiar rhythm as we ate up the miles. Maria sat quiet at first, staring out the windshield at the ribbon of highway unwinding in front of us. The desert at night has a way of making people contemplative, all that space and stars making you feel small and significant at the same time. But there was something else in her silence, something that felt more like fear than wonder. About 20 minutes down the road, her phone rang. She answered it quick, speaking Spanish in a voice so low I could barely hear her over the engine noise. But I caught the tone, urgent and scared, and I saw how her knuckles went white gripping the phone. The conversation didn't last long, maybe 30 seconds, and when she hung up, she immediately turned the phone face down on her lap. I asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, too quick and too bright. Just her sister checking on her, she said, worried about her driving alone at night. But I've been reading people for half a century, and Maria Santos was lying through her teeth. The way she kept checking her mirrors, the way she jumped when a semi passed us going the other direction, the way she clutched that backpack like it contained everything she owned in the world. Something was wrong, something bigger than a broken-down car and a job interview in Reno. And whatever it was, I was now part of it whether I liked it or not. Before we get back into the story, please consider subscribing to the channel and comment where you are tuning in from. Sometimes our adventures are closer than we think. We pulled into the truck stop in Fernley just as the first hint of dawn was touching the eastern horizon. The place was typical of these highway oases, bright fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness, a handful of big rigs parked in neat rows, their drivers catching what sleep they could before the next leg of their journeys. I told Maria she could use the restroom while I topped off my fuel tank, maybe grab some coffee and figure out her next move from there. She nodded and climbed down from the cab, still clutching that backpack like her life depended on it. I watched her walk toward the building, noting how she kept her head down and moved quick, like she didn't want to be seen. Something about her body language set off alarm bells in my head, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, the way she seemed to shrink into herself. I was running my credit card through the fuel pump when I spotted them. Two men in a black SUV parked at the far edge of the lot, engine running, windows tinted dark enough that I couldn't make out their faces. Nothing unusual about that, plenty of people stop at truck stops, but there was something deliberate about the way they were positioned. They had a clear view of my rig and the building entrance, and they weren't moving. The fuel pump clicked off and I replaced the nozzle, still keeping one eye on that SUV. Maria had been in the restroom for maybe 10 minutes now, longer than seemed normal. I was starting to wonder if I should go check on her when she came hurrying out of the building, moving faster than before, her face pale in the parking lot lights. She practically ran to the passenger side of my cab, yanking the door open and climbing in without a word. When I asked if she was ready to go, she said, "Yes, please, we need to leave now." There was something in her voice I hadn't heard before, raw panic barely held in check. As I fired up Dolly's engine, I saw the black SUV's headlights come on. We pulled out of the truck stop and back onto Highway 50, and sure enough, those headlights fell in behind us, keeping their distance but staying visible in my mirrors. I didn't say anything to Maria right away, just kept driving and watching. But when they matched every lane change I made for the next 20 miles, I knew we had a problem. Maria must have noticed me checking my mirrors because she turned around to look out the back window. When she saw the SUV, she made a sound like a wounded animal and slumped forward in her seat. I asked her straight out what was going on, who those people were and why they were following us. That's when she broke down and told me the truth. She wasn't going to Reno for any job interview. She was running, had been running for 3 days now, ever since she'd witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see. She worked for a construction company in Las Vegas, doing their books, keeping track of payroll and expenses. Honest work for what she thought was an honest company. But 3 nights ago, she'd gone back to the office to pick up some files she'd forgotten, and she'd seen her boss, Miguel Herrera, meeting with men she didn't recognize. They were exchanging briefcases, talking in low voices about shipments and schedules. She might have thought nothing of it, might have just turned around and left, but then she heard one of the men mention how they needed to clean house, eliminate anyone who might cause problems. She'd managed to slip back out without being seen, but not before taking pictures with her phone. Clear shots of Herrera with the briefcase, of the men he was meeting with, of license plates and faces. She knew what she'd stumbled onto, knew that construction company was being used to launder drug money. And she knew her life wasn't worth a plugged nickel if they found out what she'd seen. So she'd run, taking only what she could carry, driving north with no real plan except to get as far from Las Vegas as possible. Her car breaking down in the middle of nowhere had seemed like the worst luck in the world. But now, with those headlights steady in our mirrors, she was starting to think it might have been the best thing that could have happened to her. I reached for my CB radio and switched to channel 19, the trucker's frequency. Within minutes, I had 3 other drivers responding to my call, asking what I needed. I gave them our location and asked if anyone had seen a black SUV with Nevada plates asking questions about passengers. The response I got back made my blood run cold. Big Mike, running eastbound near Fallon, said 2 men in a vehicle matching that description had approached him at a rest stop 6 hours earlier. They'd shown him a picture of Maria, offered him $500 cash for information about where she was headed. When he'd told them he hadn't seen her, they'd gotten aggressive, suggested he might be lying. Diesel Dan, parked for his mandatory rest break near Austin, reported the same thing. The men were working the truck stops and rest areas, showing Maria's picture, offering money and making threats in equal measure. They had resources, organization, and they were closing in. I looked over at Maria, saw the terror in her eyes as she listened to the radio chatter. She asked me what we were going to do, and honestly, I didn't have a good answer. We were still 200 miles from Sacramento, where she'd planned to turn her evidence over to the FBI. And that black SUV wasn't going anywhere. The highway stretched ahead of us, empty and dark, and for the first time in my 28 years of driving, I wasn't sure I was going to make it to my destination. The black SUV stayed with us through Fallon, through Austin, through every small Nevada town that barely rated a name on the map. They were patient, professional, keeping just close enough to let us know they were there, but far enough back to avoid any highway patrol that might take interest. By the time we crossed into California, Maria's hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold her phone. We'd been driving for 6 hours straight when they made their first real move. Coming down out of the Sierra Nevada foothills, the highway narrowed to 2 lanes with a steep drop on one side and rock wall on the other. That's when the SUV accelerated, pulling into the left lane like they were going to pass. But instead of going around, they matched our speed and started edging closer to Dolly's side. I had maybe 3 feet of shoulder between my trailer and a 200-foot drop into a canyon, and these guys were trying to squeeze me off the road. I downshifted and gave Dolly more throttle, 18 wheels grabbing asphalt as we pulled away from them. But they stayed right with us, their engine roaring as they fought to keep pace with 40 tons of truck and trailer. Maria was pressed back against her seat, watching the SUV through her side window, seeing how close they were to forcing us over the edge. She asked me what they wanted, why they couldn't just leave her alone. I told her what I'd learned in 28 years on the road, that some people would rather destroy something than let it slip away from them. The SUV fell back when we hit a straightaway and a California Highway Patrol car appeared in the distance, but I knew they weren't giving up. They were just waiting for a better opportunity, and in this business, patience usually wins out over desperation. We made it to the outskirts of Sacramento just as the sun was coming up, painting the valley in shades of gold and orange that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Maria was trying to get her phone to work, scrolling through contacts to find the FBI number she'd looked up days earlier. She'd been planning to walk into their field office, turn over her evidence, and disappear into witness protection before Herrera and his people could find her. I was starting to think we might actually make it when I saw them in my mirror. Not just the black SUV this time, but 2 additional vehicles, a white panel van and a dark blue sedan, all moving in formation toward us as we approached a traffic light in a commercial district. The light turned red and I had to stop, 40 tons of momentum not being something you can just ignore. That's when they made their play, the 3 vehicles boxing us in from behind and both sides. I watched in my mirrors as men got out of all 3 cars, and I knew we were in serious trouble. Maria saw them too, started saying something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. One of the men, tall and thin with a face like hammered leather, walked up to my driver's side window and motioned for me to roll it down. When I did, he smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made you want to check if your wallet was still in your pocket. He told me they just wanted the woman and the phone, that I could drive away and forget this whole thing ever happened. Said they'd even pay me for my trouble, $5,000 cash for being reasonable. All I had to do was tell Maria to get out of the truck and walk away. I looked over at Maria, saw the defeat in her eyes, saw how she was already reaching for the door handle. She was ready to sacrifice herself to keep me safe. This woman I'd known for less than 8 hours was prepared to die rather than let me get hurt on her account. That's when I made the decision that probably saved both our lives and definitely changed everything that came after. Instead of answering the man outside my window, I dropped Dolly into gear, gunned the engine, and drove straight through their roadblock. The impact with the white panel van sent it spinning into a parked car, and I felt Dolly's front bumper crumple as we broke free. Alarms were going off, people were shouting, and my engine was making a sound that told me we'd taken damage. But we were moving again, and that was all that mattered. The chase that followed was like something out of a movie. Except movies don't show you how hard it is to run from somebody when you're driving a big rig through city streets. I had the CB radio cranked up, calling for help from any driver who could hear me. And within minutes I had truckers all over Sacramento reporting our location to police and trying to block streets to slow down our pursuers. Maria's phone battery was dying, the screen flickering as she tried to send the photos to the FBI email address she'd found. She was crying and cursing and praying all at the same time, jabbing at the phone screen while I wrestled Dolly through turns she was never meant to make. We ended up in an industrial area near the rail yards, me pulling into what I thought was an empty warehouse lot but turned out to be a dead end. The 3 vehicles followed us in, and suddenly we were trapped with nowhere to go and no way out. I shut down the engine and looked at Maria. Her phone was completely dead now, but she still had the physical device, still had the evidence that could bring down Herrera and his operation. The men were getting out of their cars again, and this time there was nowhere for us to run. The warehouse lot was quiet except for the ticking of cooling engines and the distant sound of sirens somewhere in the city. I could see the tall man from before walking toward my cab, flanked by 2 others, all of them moving with the confidence of people who thought they'd already won. Maria was clutching her dead phone like a talisman, and I could hear her whispering what sounded like a prayer. I told her to listen to me carefully, that when I gave her the signal she needed to run for that gap between the buildings to our left. There was a chain-link fence back there, but it was low enough to climb, and beyond it I could see a residential neighborhood where she might find help. She started to protest, saying she wouldn't leave me, but I cut her off. The phone was the only thing that mattered now, the only way to stop Herrera and his people from doing this to someone else. The tall man reached my window and tapped on the glass with something metallic. When I looked down, I saw it was a pistol, small and black and pointed right at my chest. He wasn't smiling anymore. He told me this was the last chance that they could do this easy or hard, But either way, the woman and the phone were coming with them. I rolled down the window and started to tell him we could work something out, that maybe we could all be reasonable about this. But while I was talking, I was also reaching down beside my seat, feeling around for the tire iron I kept there for emergencies. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing, and I figured if I was going to go down, I might as well go down swinging. The sirens were getting closer now, still distant but definitely approaching. The tall man heard them too, and I saw his expression change from confident to concerned. He started barking orders to his men, telling them to hurry up, to get the woman and get out of there before the police arrived. That's when I made my move. I shoved the door open as hard as I could, catching the tall man in the chest and sending him stumbling backward. At the same time, I yelled for Maria to run, and she didn't hesitate. She grabbed her backpack and bolted out the passenger door, heading for the gap between buildings like I'd told her. The tall man recovered faster than I'd expected, bringing his gun up and pointing it at me as I climbed down from the cab. But the sirens were loud now, maybe 6 blocks away, and I could see the indecision in his eyes. He wanted to finish this, but he also wanted to get out of there before the authorities arrived. One of his men went after Maria, chasing her toward the fence, but she was younger and faster and scared enough to find speed she didn't know she had. I watched her clear the chain link in one fluid motion and disappear into the neighborhood beyond. The man who'd been chasing her stopped at the fence, knowing he'd never catch her now. The tall man was still pointing his gun at me, asking where she was going, demanding I tell him where she lived, who she knew, where she might run to. I told him the truth, that I didn't know any of those things, that I'd picked her up on a dark highway and barely knew her name. But I could see he didn't believe me, could see him weighing whether to pull that trigger or cut his losses and run. The decision was made for him when the first police car came screaming into the lot, followed by 2 more and an FBI vehicle that must have been monitoring police radio traffic. The tall man and his crew dropped their weapons and put their hands up, suddenly looking like ordinary citizens who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it was too late for that charade. The truckers on the CB network had been feeding information to the police throughout our chase, giving them license plate numbers and descriptions, and a running commentary of everything that had happened. When Maria emerged from the residential neighborhood 20 minutes later, escorted by 2 FBI agents she'd flagged down on the street, she still had her phone and her story and her willingness to testify. The arrests that followed made headlines across 3 states. Miguel Herrera and 14 members of his organization were charged with drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. The construction company was shut down, its assets seized, and several other businesses in Las Vegas were revealed to be part of the same network. Maria did enter witness protection just like she'd planned, but not before she made sure I knew how grateful she was. The FBI agents told me she'd talked about nothing but my courage and kindness, how a stranger had risked everything to help her when she had nowhere else to turn. Dolly needed 3 weeks in the shop to repair the damage from our encounter with the roadblock, but insurance covered most of it once the police report was filed. I used the downtime to visit my kids in Kansas City, something I hadn't done in over a year. Sarah and Michael were surprised to see me, and even more surprised when I told them about Maria and the choice I'd made to help her. 2 weeks after I got back on the road, I found a postcard in my mail forwarded from the trucking company dispatcher. It was a picture of the Rocky Mountains, postmarked from somewhere in Colorado, with just 2 words written on the back in careful handwriting: "Thank you." I keep that postcard in my visor now, right next to the picture of my kids. It reminds me that sometimes the most important decisions we make happen in split seconds on dark highways, when we choose to stop for a stranger who needs help. And maybe that's what this job is really about, not just moving cargo from one place to another, but being there when someone needs you most. That's my story, and I suppose that's why I tell it. Not because it makes me look good, but because it reminds me that we're all just traveling the same highway, and sometimes the best thing you can do is pull over and offer someone a ride.